Don't come any closer, or I swear I'll break every damn thing in this room. The crash of shattering glass tore through the stillness of the Scott mansion. The voice, low, sharp trembling somewhere between rage and despair, belonged to Daniel Scott, once one of Boston's most brilliant tech billionaires. The morning light spilled through the wide glass windows, catching the fractured glint of crystal on the marble floor. Outside, rain had just ended. The world was dripping with new beginnings. But inside, everything still bled silence and bitterness. At the doorway stood Savannah James, young, nervous, and breathing faster than she wanted to. Her hands tightened around the breakfast tray she carried, her reflection trembling in the polished floor. She had heard stories before she came here. The blind billionaire who fired every caretaker. The man who hasn't smiled since his accident. The ghost who lives in daylight. Now standing there, she realized none of those stories had captured what it felt like to face him. Daniel sat by the grand piano, head tilted slightly, as though he could see her with the corners of his broken world. His pale eyes, gray and stormy, looked straight ahead, though she knew they saw nothing. His jaw was tight, his voice low. "Didn't you hear me? I said, get out." Savannah swallowed the knot in her throat. "I'm sorry, Mr. Scott. I'm just here to bring your breakfast. Then leave it and go." Her eyes darted around the room. Papers scattered on the floor, whiskey glass on the table, curtains drawn halfway, suffocating the sunlight. The air smelled faintly of cedarwood and loneliness. She placed the tray on the table, hands trembling slightly. "Would you like me to?" I said, "Go." His hand struck the edge of the table. The tray rattled silverware clinking against porcelain. Savannah flinched, stepping back, but something in his voice beneath all that fury didn't sound cruel. It sounded broken. "I understand you don't want help," she said softly. "But your mother hired me because she's worried about you. I'm not here out of pity, Mr. Scott." "Then what are you here for?" His tone cut like ice. Savannah hesitated. "To help you remember how to live again." The silence that followed was heavier than the rain outside. He turned his face slightly toward her, as if surprised by the steadiness of her voice. Then, in a softer, bitter whisper, "You think I forgot how to live. You think a few months of blindness made me forget who I am." She met his direction, even if he couldn't see her. "No, I think it made you forget what it feels like to be seen." For the first time, he didn't respond. His fingers tightened on the edge of the piano veins trembling beneath his skin. She could almost see the war inside him, between pride and pain. Finally, he muttered, "Get out before I change my mind." She obeyed, walking out with quiet steps. But as she closed the door behind her, she heard the faintest sound, a breath that could have been a sigh. Or maybe the ghost of a man remembering what it felt like to have someone care. That night, the mansion was quieter than ever. The storm had passed, but thunder still echoed somewhere beyond the hills. Savannah sat in the small room given to her at the end of the west wing, staring at the lamp on her nightstand. She had only been here one day, and already her chest ached for reasons she didn't fully understand. Maybe it was because she'd seen the photographs in the hallway, Daniel smiling beside a woman in a white dress. The woman was beautiful, her eyes shining with the kind of love Savannah didn't think existed anymore. She remembered what the housekeeper, Mrs. Gloria, had whispered earlier that afternoon. The accident took more than his sight, child. It took his heart. His fiancée left 2 weeks after the crash, said she couldn't handle it. He hasn't touched the piano since. Savannah looked toward her window, where the rain traced silver lines against the glass. She whispered to herself, "If you can't see the world anymore, Mr. Scott, maybe I can help you feel it again." The next morning she woke up before dawn and prepared breakfast again. Oatmeal with honey, toasted bread, black coffee, and orange slices arranged neatly on a porcelain plate. Her mother used to say that how you serve food shows how much light you carry in your soul. She took a deep breath before knocking on his door. "Mr. Scott, it's Savannah. May I come in?" No answer. She knocked again. "I just brought breakfast." Still nothing, so she quietly opened the door. He was sitting by the window this time, the first rays of sunlight falling across his face. His white shirt was half unbuttoned, sleeves rolled up. He looked almost human in that light, less like the legend of a cruel billionaire, more like a man trying to remember who he used to be. "I told you yesterday." "Yes, I remember." She smiled gently. "But I don't take orders before breakfast." He let out a sound somewhere between a scoff and disbelief. "You're bold. Or stupid." She placed the tray down. "But I'm still here." She poured coffee into a cup, the aroma filling the air. He didn't move, just listened. The faint sound of pouring liquid, the clink of spoon against porcelain. Her movements were gentle, deliberate, almost soothing. "Your mother said you used to play the piano every morning," she said. "Do you still remember the notes?" He turned his head slightly toward her. "I remember every note. I just don't remember why I used to play." "Maybe because it made you feel alive," she said softly. He smiled bitterly. "Feeling alive is overrated." Savannah looked at him for a moment. His face, even marked by exhaustion, still held the quiet kind of beauty that comes from pain. She realized she was staring too long when he tilted his head. "You're staring," he said quietly. Her breath caught. "I thought you couldn't see." "I can't," he replied. "But I can feel when someone's watching me." Her heart skipped. There was something magnetic in his voice, something dangerously intimate. "I should go," she murmured. But as she turned to leave, his hand brushed the table, accidentally knocking over a glass of water. The sound startled her, and before she could move, his fingers reached out, catching her wrist. For a second time, stopped. His hand, warm, strong, trembling, slightly tightened around hers. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Why are you doing this, Savannah?" She met his unseeing eyes. "Because someone once stayed for me when no one else would." He didn't reply. He only released her hand slowly, as if reluctant to let go of something he didn't yet understand. That night, Mrs. Gloria found Savannah cleaning the piano room. "You don't have to do that, dear," the old woman said kindly. Savannah shook her head. "He doesn't let anyone in here, does he know?" Mrs. Gloria said quietly. That was where he used to sit with her, his fiancée. The day of the accident, he was driving home to propose again. She survived. He didn't, at least, not the same way. Savannah ran her fingers lightly over the piano keys. Dust danced in the air, like old memories, refusing to fade. She pressed one key, C major. The sound echoed softly. From somewhere down the hallway, she heard his voice, hoarse but sharp. "Who told you to play that?" Savannah froze. Daniel was standing by the door, cane in hand, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't mean to." But he walked forward slowly, each step steady, deliberate. "Play it again." She blinked, unsure if she'd heard him right. "What?" "Play it again," he repeated. So she did. One note, then another. The melody was hesitant at first, trembling like something half forgotten. But as she continued, Daniel moved closer, his breathing deepening with each note. He reached the piano, his fingers finding the keys beside hers. For a moment their hands brushed, and suddenly they were playing together. clumsy, imperfect, yet heartbreakingly human. When the last note faded, he whispered, "You shouldn't have done that. Because now I remember what it feels like to see." Savannah's throat tightened. "But you can't." He smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth trembling. "I can't see you, but I felt you, and that's worse." The room fell silent again. Two souls who didn't mean to find each other stood on opposite sides of a piano, and somewhere in between, something fragile began to breathe. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, carrying away the scent of rain and the echo of unspoken promises. Savannah stepped back, her voice barely a whisper. "Then maybe, Mr. Scott, it's time to remember how to live again." He didn't answer, but his head tilted slightly, as though the words had found their way past his defenses. That night, Daniel sat alone by the piano, long after everyone had gone to bed, his fingers tracing invisible music. For the first time in months, he didn't drink. He just listened to the silence she'd left behind. And maybe, just maybe, that silence sounded like hope. If you've ever believed that light can find its way through the darkest eyes, stay with us. Because this story is just beginning, and love, as you'll see, doesn't always need sight to see clearly. The morning sun crept slowly through the long glass panels of the Scott mansion, spreading a faint golden glow over the marble floors. Savannah woke to the soft hum of the city outside, the sound of cars, the distant whistle of a train, the kind of morning noise she'd grown up with all her life. But here, inside this house, everything was still, like time had forgotten to move. She tied her hair into a neat bun, slipped into a white blouse and gray slacks, and glanced at the clock. 6:42 a.m. She was late. Again. By the time she reached the kitchen, Mrs. Gloria was already plating breakfast. The scent of brewed coffee and toasted sourdough filled the air. "You're up early, dear," the old woman said, handing Savannah a tray. "He's in the study this time. Says he doesn't want anyone near his room." Savannah nodded quietly, though her heart started beating faster. After what happened last night, the piano, the way their hands brushed, she didn't know what to expect. She balanced the tray carefully and made her way through the long corridor, past the hallway lined with black and white portraits of Daniel's family. His father's stern eyes, his mother's graceful smile, his own youthful grin from a lifetime ago. A family built on wealth and perfection, and now haunted by silence. She stopped in front of the study door and hesitated. Her knuckles hovered just above the polished wood. Maybe I shouldn't go in. Maybe he doesn't want to see me or hear me. But before she could talk herself out of it, she knocked softly. "Mr. Scott, it's Savannah. May I come in?" For a moment only silence. Then his voice quiet, low, and laced with fatigue. "You're persistent, aren't you?" She smiled faintly. "I try to be. Come in." The study smelled faintly of leather and old books. Daniel sat by the window, his cane resting against the chair, his head slightly turned toward the sound of her steps. The light hit his face, gently revealing faint shadows under his eyes. He hadn't slept well. "I brought you breakfast," she said softly, setting the tray on the table beside him. He nodded but didn't reach for it. "I can't seem to eat in the mornings anymore. Coffee's enough. Skipping meals isn't good for recovery," she reminded him. Recovery. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "There's no recovery for me, Miss James. I'm not sick. I'm just unfinished." She wanted to say something, but the way he said that, softly, almost to himself, made her chest ache. She sat across from him quietly, folding her hands on her lap. The clock on the wall ticked between them. "Did I say something funny?" he asked after a moment, his tone guarded. "No," she said. "Just honest." I think that's rarer than being kind. He tilted his head slightly, as if her voice painted colors in the darkness around him. You speak like someone who's lost something. Savannah blinked, caught off guard. Maybe I have. He didn't ask what it was, and she was grateful. There were things she didn't want to speak of, the hospital corridors, the mother who slipped away too soon, the nights when the only light in their house was the hum of an old refrigerator. Instead, she asked, "Do you ever go outside?" "No," he said flatly. "I don't need to." "You might not need to," she said gently, "but maybe you should." He turned his head toward her voice, his expression unreadable. "And what do you suggest?" I look at Savannah. The sun I can't see, the world that moved on without me. Not everything worth seeing needs eyes, Mr. Scott. Something shifted in the air. His lips parted slightly, and for a heartbeat, she thought he might say something softer. But he didn't. He turned away instead, ending the conversation. She sighed quietly, standing to leave. But as she picked up the tray, his voice stopped her. "Savannah," he said. She froze. "Yes, sir?" There was a pause long enough for her pulse to stutter. "What color is the sky today?" She looked out the window, where the morning fog was lifting, revealing streaks of pale blue and pink. "It's light," she said finally, like the inside of a promise. For the first time, Daniel smiled barely, but enough to make her heart skip. "That's a strange answer." Maybe she said softly, "But strange doesn't mean wrong." The following days unfolded quietly. Savannah learned Daniel's patterns, the way he counted his steps to the kitchen, the way his fingers brushed over the furniture edges, the exact moment he turned toward the sound of her voice. Each day he asked her to describe something new. The color of dawn, the shape of clouds, the warmth of her tea. It was as though he was learning the world again, piece by fragile piece, through her words. And she, without realizing it, was learning him. He liked his coffee black, but his silence sweet. He hated the sound of rain, but loved the smell of it. He flinched whenever she mentioned music, but sometimes at night, she heard faint notes from the piano room, the same melody she'd played that first evening. One night, she walked past the door and paused. The tune was slow, searching like a man tracing a memory he'd forgotten how to hold. She leaned against the wall, closing her eyes, letting the sound of it wrap around her. When it stopped, his voice came from inside, rough and uncertain. "You're still there, aren't you?" Savannah froze. "I didn't mean to listen, it's fine," he said quietly. "I just didn't want to be alone." She stepped inside. The lamp cast a warm glow on the piano keys, on his hands poised in midair. He looked fragile, almost young in that light. "I can sit here if you want," she said softly. He nodded a small gesture. Minutes passed in silence. Then, without looking up, he said, "I used to play for someone. Every morning. Until the day she left, I couldn't touch this thing again." Savannah hesitated. "Your fiancé?" "Yes." His jaw tensed. "Elena. We were supposed to get married that summer. I designed the ring myself. Titanium band. Simple, elegant. Like her." His voice cracked slightly. "She said she'd stay through anything. And then I woke up blind, and she was gone." Savannah felt something deep and heavy twist in her chest. "I'm sorry." He laughed bitterly. "Don't be. People don't owe you forever." "Maybe not," she said softly. "But love doesn't vanish that easily either." He turned his head toward her voice. "And what do you know about love, Miss James? Enough," she whispered, "to know that the ones who leave don't always want to." For a moment they just looked at each other, the man who couldn't see and the woman who saw too much. Something electric unspoken threaded between them. The next morning, Savannah found him by the garden doors, leaning slightly on his cane. The sunlight painted his white shirt gold, "You're outside," she said, smiling in disbelief. "Don't sound so surprised. I just thought you said that I didn't need to see the world," he finished for her. "Maybe I was wrong." She stepped beside him, watching how his fingers grazed the wooden railing as though memorizing texture. "It smells like lilacs," he said suddenly. She blinked. "You can tell." He smiled faintly. "I can't see colors anymore, but scents, sounds. They make pictures in my head. The way you speak, for instance, it feels like sunlight through glass." Her heart stumbled in her chest. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because it makes people hope." He turned his face toward her. "Maybe hope isn't such a bad thing." They stood in silence, side by side, as the wind brushed through the garden. Savannah found herself watching him differently. The way his hair caught the light, the way his mouth softened when he listened. She tried not to imagine what he might look like if he smiled more often, or how his voice might sound if it said her name like a promise. But when he finally did, when he said softly, "Savannah," it felt like her own name had learned how to breathe again. "Yes." He hesitated. "If I asked you something personal, would you tell me the truth?" "I'll try." "What color are you?" The question startled her. She blinked, unsure if she heard him right. What do you mean?" He smiled faintly. "I used to paint before all this. I still think in colors. So when I hear someone's voice, I wonder what shade it might be." She took a slow breath. "Then I guess I'd be brown, like the earth after rain. Ordinary, familiar." "Warm," he murmured. "I was going to say warm." Her throat tightened. "And you?" she asked gently. He smiled again, faint and sad. "Once I was blue, clear, certain. But now, maybe gray. Like a storm that doesn't know if it wants to end." She wanted to reach out to touch his hand, to tell him he wasn't a storm. But before she could, his mother's voice echoed faintly from the hallway. "Daniel, darling, I'm heading to the airport now." He stiffened instantly, retreating back into the man she'd met that first morning. "You should go," he said quietly. "I don't want her to see you here." Savannah hesitated, her chest tightening. "Why not?" "She doesn't like me depending on anyone," he said, his tone clipped. "Least of all, someone she didn't choose." Savannah nodded slowly, taking the tray from his side table. "Then I'll see you tomorrow, Mr. Scott." As she turned to leave, his hand brushed hers, just for a heartbeat, but enough to make her stop. "Savannah," he murmured, his voice suddenly unsteady. "Don't let me scare you away." She looked at him, really looked, and realized something that made her heart twist. He wasn't trying to push her away. He was begging her to stay. And without thinking, she whispered, "I won't." Then she left before the sound of his breaking breath could reach her. That night, Daniel stood by the window, listening to the faint hum of the world outside. Somewhere down the hall, he could still hear the echo of her voice, the warmth in her laughter, the steadiness in her promise. He whispered into the darkness, almost afraid of the answer. "Savannah James. What have you done to me?" The first snow of winter had arrived earlier than expected, blanketing Boston in a quiet, silvery calm. From the tall windows of the Scott mansion, the world outside looked almost unreal. White rooftops, sleeping trees, the faint echo of church bells from somewhere beyond the hills. Inside, however, the air still felt heavy with something unnamed. Savannah stood by the kitchen counter, staring at the steam curling up from her coffee cup. It had been 3 weeks since she started working for Daniel Scott, and though his temper had softened, his walls were still made of glass, clear enough for her to see through, but impossible to touch. "Are you still thinking about him?" Mrs. Gloria's voice broke her thoughts. The old woman was slicing apples, her movements slow but precise. Savannah smiled faintly. "You make it sound like I'm in love with him." Mrs. Gloria looked up over her glasses. "Aren't you?" Savannah's smile faltered. She wanted to say no. She wanted to laugh, to deflect, to hide behind the same careful poise she'd always worn. But the truth was different. The truth was softer, heavier, and it lived in the small moments she didn't mean to notice, like the way he tilted his head when listening, or how his voice dropped when he said her name. "I don't even know if he remembers what love is," she murmured. "Then teach him," the old woman said simply. Savannah looked down at her coffee, watching the ripples fade. "Some things can't be taught." Mrs. Gloria chuckled. "My dear, everything can be learned again, especially the things worth remembering." When Savannah brought his tea that afternoon, the study was dim except for the faint glow of the fireplace. Daniel sat near it, head bowed, his fingers moving slowly across the strings of a guitar. The melody was uncertain, fragile, like something half recalled from a dream. She stood quietly by the door, afraid that the sound might shatter if she moved too quickly. He didn't lift his head. "You're staring again." She smiled, setting the tray down on the small table beside him. "And you're playing again. It doesn't sound right." "It sounds real," she said softly. He paused, his thumb stilling on the strings. "You think everything broken is real, don't you? Maybe that's because everything real is a little broken." Her words hung in the air between them. For a while, the only sound was the soft hiss of burning wood. Daniel finally leaned back, exhaling. "My mother called from New York. She wants me to see another specialist." Savannah brightened. "That's good, isn't it?" "Maybe," he said. "She thinks I'm ready, but she doesn't know the truth. I've stopped wanting to see again." Her chest tightened. "Why?" He turned his face toward the fire, its glow catching the outline of his jaw. "Because the last thing I saw before everything went black was her face. Elena's." She was screaming. "I don't want my first sight back to be that memory." Savannah's throat went dry. "You can't let one memory chain you forever." He gave a small, humorless laugh. "You talk as if light is a choice." "Maybe it is," she whispered. He tilted his head. "What color is the fire, Savannah?" She blinked, surprised by the question. "Orange, sometimes gold, sometimes red." He smiled faintly. "Then tell me which one burns more." She hesitated, then said quietly, "The one you never touch." Something flickered in his expression, an emotion she couldn't name. Later that evening, the snow outside thickened. Savannah was about to retire to her room when she heard a faint thud upstairs, followed by a muffled curse. Her heart skipped. She rushed up the staircase and found Daniel by the hallway wall, one hand clutching his cane, the other pressed to the polished wood as if trying to feel his way back. "Mr. Scott." She hurried to him, steadying his arm. "I'm fine," he muttered, breath sharp. "I just miscounted the steps." "You shouldn't be walking alone at night," she scolded gently. "I was trying to remember the house," he said. "It used to be mine. Now it feels like a stranger's." She guided him carefully back to his room. "You should rest." He sank onto the edge of the bed, sighing. "You sound like my mother." "That's not a compliment." "It wasn't meant to be." Savannah smiled, though worry tugged at her chest. "You really should listen to her sometimes." He looked toward her voice, his sightless gaze steady. "And to you," her breath caught. "Only if you want to." He reached out then, slow, uncertain. His fingertips brushed her wrist before tracing lightly down to her hand. She didn't move. "Your hands," he said quietly. "They're warm. You must have been holding something." "Just the tea tray," she whispered. "Funny," he murmured. It feels like sunlight. Her pulse jumped. She wanted to pull away, but his hand tightened, holding her there, not in demand but in hesitation, as if afraid that if he let go, she would disappear. I forget what warmth feels like. Sometimes, he said softly. Everything's been cold since the accident. Savannah swallowed hard. Then maybe you should let someone stay long enough to warm you again. He didn't answer, but she felt his thumb trace the inside of her palm, a slow, unconscious gesture. She wondered if he realized what it did to her heart. When she finally pulled back, her hand trembled. "Good night, Mr. Scott. Good night, Savannah." Her name in his voice sounded like a promise he didn't yet understand. The next morning, the storm had passed. Sunlight returned bright and sharp against the snow. Daniel asked her to describe it, and she found herself painting the world for him, in words, how the ice on the branches glistened like glass, how the air smelled clean, almost electric. He listened in silence, his lips parted slightly, as though tasting her descriptions. "Close your eyes," she said suddenly. He frowned. "They're already closed." "Then close them deeper," she insisted. "Try to imagine what I'm saying." He exhaled slowly, following her voice. "Now picture the snow," she whispered. "It's quiet but alive. Every flake is falling toward you, soft and steady, like time slowing down. You can't see it, but you can feel it, each one melting when it touches your skin." He didn't speak, but his fingers moved faintly, as if catching invisible flakes in the air. "And the sun?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "It's shy today," she said, smiling, "but it still tries. It pushes through the clouds like a child learning to walk again." He let out a breath, slow and shaky. "That's beautiful. You're seeing it, aren't you?" He nodded. "Through you." She felt her throat tighten again. "Then maybe you're not as blind as you think." His lips curved slightly. "Maybe I'm just looking in the right direction." For the next few days, the house changed. It wasn't obvious at first, but Savannah felt it the way the air seemed lighter, how laughter occasionally escaped from rooms that had long been silent. Daniel began asking for more walks outside, and sometimes he even helped her set the table, counting the distance between plates with quiet focus. One afternoon, while she was trimming flowers in the kitchen, he appeared at the doorway. "I heard you singing," he said. Savannah nearly dropped the scissors. "You what?" "Don't stop," he said calmly. "Your voice. It makes the house sound alive again." She blushed, setting the scissors down. "I didn't think anyone was listening." "I always listen," he said, "even when I pretend not to." The warmth in his tone startled her. She smiled faintly. "That sounds like a confession. Maybe it is." They stared at each other for a heartbeat that stretched too long, too close. Then the moment passed, and Savannah turned back to the flowers, pretending to focus. But his next words cut gently through the silence. "I dreamt of you last night." Her hands froze. "You what?" "It's strange." He continued, his voice low. "I never see faces in my dreams anymore. Only sounds, movements, feelings. But last night, I saw the color brown, warm, soft, like earth after rain." Her heart thudded. "And you think that was me?" He smiled faintly. "I know it was." Savannah tried to breathe evenly, but the air felt too thin. She wanted to ask what it meant, to demand if he was just saying what he didn't yet understand. But the truth was, she didn't want to ruin it. Because for the first time, she felt seen. That evening, Daniel asked her to read to him. He chose something random from the shelf, a worn collection of poems. She sat by the window while he leaned back in his chair, head tilted, listening. Her voice filled the quiet room, slow and steady, weaving through the verses about loss and longing. When she reached the last line, her voice cracked. He turned his head slightly. "Why did you stop?" She wiped a tear she didn't realize had fallen. "Because it's too sad." He smiled softly. "Then read me something sad again tomorrow. Maybe it'll hurt less if I hear it from you." Savannah stared at him, her chest tightening with something she couldn't name. And before she could stop herself, she whispered, "You're changing Daniel." He raised an eyebrow. "Am I?" "Yes," she said quietly. "You're starting to feel again." He chuckled softly, though it sounded fragile. "And that's dangerous, isn't it?" She nodded. "For both of us." That night when Savannah returned to her room, she couldn't sleep. The snow outside had stopped, but her mind wouldn't. Every word he said replayed in her head, the softness in his tone, the way his fingers brushed hers earlier, the subtle tremor in his voice when he spoke her name. And somewhere deep inside her, beneath all her careful restraint, something began to shift. Something she couldn't stop, even if she wanted to. In another room down the hall, Daniel lay awake too. His fingers tapped softly on the headboard, tracing patterns that made no sense. He kept hearing her laughter, her voice describing sunlight and snow, her scent lingering faintly in the air. He whispered to himself so quietly that even the night didn't catch it. "I wanted to forget the world." And somehow, she became the only part of it I can still see. The winter deepened, and the city outside the Scott mansion became a silent painting. Streets hushed beneath thick snow, the river frozen into silver glass. Inside, the world moved slower, softer. Days blurred into evenings. Mornings came with the sound of Savannah's footsteps and the faint rustle of Daniel's pages turning. She had learned how to move around him quietly enough, not to startle him, but not so silent that he felt alone. He in turn had learned to listen differently to the breath between her words, to the brush of her sleeve when she passed near him, to the shape of her laughter. But as peace settled into their strange rhythm, another kind of tension began to stir beneath it, something tender, unspoken, and frighteningly alive. It was on one of those mornings when the sky was gray with snow that Savannah found him standing by the window without his cane. "Mr. Scott," she said softly, startled. "You shouldn't be standing there alone." He turned toward her voice, his pale eyes unfocused, but calm. "I wanted to feel the sun." "There's no sun today," she replied, stepping closer. He smiled faintly. "Then I suppose I just wanted to feel the possibility of it." Her breath caught. "You sound almost hopeful." "Don't tell anyone," he murmured, his lips curving. "It would ruin my reputation." She laughed quietly. "You don't have a reputation anymore, Mr. Scott. Then maybe it's time I make a new one." There was something different in his voice, lighter teasing, yet with an undertone of something deeper. She felt it too, that invisible thread pulling tighter each day. When she handed him his coffee, his fingers brushed hers deliberately this time. Neither of them moved. "Savannah," he said softly. "Yes." "What does the sky look like right now?" She glanced outside. Snow was falling again, small and slow. "It looks tired," she said, "like it's been holding itself up for too long." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe it's a reflection of me." "Or of me," she whispered before she could stop herself. He turned his head, his expression unreadable. "Then we're both a little broken, aren't we?" She wanted to say something, but the weight of his words hung between them, fragile like snow that would melt if touched. That afternoon the power went out. The house fell into darkness, broken only by the flickering light of the fireplace. Savannah was in the kitchen when she heard the crash. A sharp sound, followed by silence. Her heart lurched. "Daniel." She called, her voice trembling. No answer. She ran to the study, her boots slipping slightly on the marble. The room was dark shadows, swallowing everything. Then she saw him kneeling on the floor, a shattered glass scattered around him. His hand was bleeding, faint crimson staining the carpet. God. "Daniel!" She knelt beside him, grabbing his wrist. "I'm fine," he said quickly, his tone low, almost embarrassed. "You're bleeding. It's just a cut." "Don't move," she ordered more sharply than she meant to. She found the towel on the table and wrapped it around his hand, pressing gently. He winced but didn't pull away. "Why were you walking without your cane?" she asked, voice trembling. He hesitated. "I wanted to know what it felt like not to be afraid of falling." Savannah looked up at him, her chest tight. "You don't have to prove anything." "I do," he said quietly, "to myself." She sighed, her hand still on his. "Then at least let me help you stand when you fall." He turned his face toward her. "Why do you care so much, Savannah?" She hesitated. The question was simple, but it held too many answers she wasn't ready to give. "Because someone should," she whispered finally. He smiled faintly, though she could see pain in it. "Then maybe I'm luckier than I thought." When she finished wrapping his hand, their eyes met in the half-light. The world outside had gone silent, and in that silence, something in her chest shifted, slow, irreversible. That night, the storm raged harder. Snow fell thick as fog, wind howling through the chimneys. Savannah checked on him again, finding him by the fireplace sitting in silence. The glow of the flames painted his face in shades of amber and shadow. "You're still awake," she said softly. "I couldn't sleep," he murmured. "The house feels alive tonight. Maybe it's the wind. Maybe it's you." Her breath faltered. She set the blanket she was holding on the armchair and turned toward him. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because you don't mean them." He turned his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "And if I did?" Savannah shook her head, though he couldn't see it. "Then I'd be in trouble." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I already am." A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then he spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "Savannah, do you ever wonder why you ended up here?" She frowned. "What do you mean you could have chosen another job, another house, another man to take care of? But you came here to me." She bit her lip. "Maybe I needed saving as much as you did." That made him turn slightly, his expression softening. "From what?" She hesitated. "From remembering." He didn't press her. Instead, he reached for his coffee cup on the table, his bandaged hand trembling slightly. Savannah moved to help him, but he stopped her. "I can do it," he said, though his voice wasn't as certain as usual. The cup slipped. She lunged forward, catching it before it hit the floor. But the sudden movement threw her off balance. Her knees hit the carpet, and she found herself inches from him, her hands gripping his arm to steady herself. His breath hitched. Her hair brushed his cheek. Her scent filled the small space between them. "Savannah," he whispered, his voice low, raw. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. "You should be careful," she said softly, trying to move away. But his hand found her wrist, stopping her. "You keep saving me," he murmured, "even when I don't ask you to." "That's my job," she said, though her voice shook. "No," he said, his thumb tracing lightly along her pulse. "That's your nature." Their eyes met, or would have if his could still see. Yet the weight of his gaze was enough to make her tremble. She pulled back gently, her breath uneven. You need rest. So do you, he murmured, his tone almost tender. She forced herself to stand. Good night, Daniel. He didn't stop her this time, but as she turned toward the door, his voice reached her again, quiet, almost like a confession. You make me want to see again. She froze, her hand tightening on the doorknob. When she looked back, he was still sitting by the fire, his head tilted toward her voice, his bandaged hand resting over his heart. I thought I'd buried that part of me, he said softly. But every time you walk into a room, it wakes up, and I don't know whether to thank you or hate you for it. Savannah's throat closed. Don't hate me, she whispered. Please. He smiled faintly. Then stay. Her heart cracked at the word. Stay. It sounded too much like a promise she couldn't make. She wanted to say yes, to tell him she would, to admit that she was already his, in ways neither of them understood. But something inside her, some instinct of survival, forced her to shake her head. I can't, she said quietly. Not like this. And before he could ask what she meant, she slipped out into the hall, her footsteps fading like snow, dissolving into silence. The next morning, Daniel woke to the sound of soft humming. The smell of cinnamon drifted through the air. Savannah was in the kitchen, her hair tied up, sleeves rolled, kneading dough with calm focus. He followed the sound, stopping by the doorway. You sing when you're nervous, he said. She looked up, startled. How do you know I'm nervous? He smiled. Because that song has a tremor in it. She laughed softly. You're paying too much attention. Maybe not enough. He walked toward her, counting his steps carefully. She watched him, unsure whether to move or stay. When he reached the counter, she guided his hand to the dough. Here, she said gently. Try it. Feel it. He frowned slightly but obeyed, pressing his fingertips into the soft surface. It's warm, he said after a moment. Like it's alive. She smiled faintly. That's what happens when you mix patience and heat. He turned his face toward her. Like people. She swallowed. Something like that. For a moment, the kitchen was filled with nothing but the quiet rhythm of their breathing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, I want to see your face. Savannah froze. I want to know what you look like when you smile. He continued, what your eyes do when you lie to me, what color your hair turns under sunlight. Her heart ached at the longing in his voice. Daniel. I'm going to have the surgery, he said suddenly. Her head snapped up. What, I'll go to New York. The specialist my mother mentioned. If there's even a chance, I want to take it. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. That's wonderful. He smiled faintly. Don't sound so surprised. I'm not, she whispered. I'm proud. He reached for her hand, and she let him find it. Then promise me something, anything. When I open my eyes again, he said, voice trembling, be the first thing I see. She wanted to promise. She wanted to give him that light. But somewhere deep inside, a shadow moved, a secret she had been hiding since the day she arrived. So she only said softly, we'll see. He smiled, not hearing the hesitation in her voice. And as the snow fell outside, blanketing the world in white, Savannah closed her eyes and prayed that when he finally saw again, the truth wouldn't blind him all over. It was the kind of morning that carried silence like a secret. The snow had stopped leaving behind a pale shimmer on the rooftops, and Boston seemed to hold its breath beneath a sky that couldn't decide whether to brighten or break. Savannah stood in the hallway, coat in her hands, watching the car waiting outside the gate. The driver was already loading Daniel's luggage into the trunk, the sound of closing doors echoing faintly through the cold air. He was leaving. for New York, for the surgery, for the chance to see again. And though she had known this moment would come, the reality of it still pressed against her chest, like a bruise. Miss James, Mrs. Gloria's gentle voice came from behind her. "He's ready for you." Savannah nodded and forced her feet to move. Each step toward his room felt heavier than the last. When she entered, Daniel was sitting on the edge of his bed, wearing a dark coat, his white scarf draped neatly over his shoulders. He looked calm, almost too calm, like a man who had learned to hide every tremor. He turned his head toward her the moment she entered. "I could tell it was you," he said quietly. She smiled faintly. "How?" "The way the air changes when you walk into a room. It's different. Different good or different bad." He smiled. "Just different enough to make me notice." She laughed softly, though her throat ached. "That's dangerously close to a compliment, Mr. Scott." "I'm not blind to that," he murmured, and for a brief second they both forgot the irony in his words. She adjusted the scarf on his shoulders, fingers brushing the back of his neck. He stilled under her touch, his pulse visible just beneath his skin. "Are you nervous?" she asked gently. "I was," he admitted. "But now that you're here, I'm not." Her breath hitched. "That's a terrible thing to say to someone who can't go with you." "I know," he said quietly. "That's why I said it." The honesty in his tone undid her. "Daniel," she whispered, "you'll do fine. And when it's over, when you open your eyes again, everything will be different." He tilted his head. "Will you be here when that happens?" The question hung in the air, delicate as glass. Savannah hesitated. "I'll try." He frowned slightly. "That's not a promise. It's the only truth I can give you right now." He studied the direction of her voice for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Then I'll hold on to that." When they reached the door, he paused. "Savannah." "Yes, if this works. If I can see again." His hand reached out, finding hers. "I want to see your face first. I want to know what you look like when you say my name." Her throat tightened. "Then I'll make sure to smile." He squeezed her hand once gently, then let go. As the car pulled away through the falling snow, Savannah stood by the window, her reflection fading against the glass. She didn't move until the taillights vanished into the distance, leaving only silence behind. And for the first time since she'd arrived at the mansion, she felt truly alone. 3 days passed, then 4, then a week. Each morning she walked into the quiet house and found it emptier than the day before. No piano music, no dry humor, no voice calling her name down the hall. She tried to fill the silence with chores, dusting, cooking, walking through the gardens. But everything she touched reminded her of him. The way he'd run his hands along the banister when he thought no one was looking. The way he'd pause before speaking, as if he needed to taste her name before saying it aloud. She hated how much she missed those pauses. On the 9th day, she received a call. "Savannah." It was Mrs. Gloria. "He's awake." The words hit her like lightning. He can see. They say the surgery went well. He's recovering. His mother says it'll take time for him to adjust. But, yes, he's seeing again." Savannah's hand trembled around the phone. "That's wonderful news." Mrs. Gloria hesitated. "He's asking for you." Her heart skipped. "For me?" "Yes, dear. He said he wants to see you as soon as he's discharged." Savannah pressed a hand against her chest. "I'll think about it." But she didn't. Not that night. Not the next morning. Because deep down beneath the joy and relief, something else stirred a fear that once he opened his eyes, once he truly saw her, the illusion would break. She knew what she looked like. Not like Elena with her porcelain skin and golden hair. Savannah's beauty was quieter, darker, shaped by struggle and storms. And though Daniel had never cared about color, she wasn't sure if sight might change that. What if the light took her away from him 2 weeks later? Daniel returned home. The house buzzed with quiet excitement. Mrs. Gloria arranged fresh lilies by the staircase, and the staff hurried about like whispers. Savannah stayed in her room, her pulse loud in her ears. When she finally stepped into the hallway, he was already there, standing by the window, where he used to stand blind. But this time he was looking at the world, at the light pouring through the glass, and then at her. He turned, and their eyes met for the first time. For a moment, neither of them breathed. He was exactly as she'd imagined, strong lines softened by gentleness, blue eyes like twilight before rain, and his expression when he saw her was unreadable. Shock, awe, something else she couldn't name. "Savannah," he whispered, almost as if saying it might make her disappear. She forced a small smile. "Welcome home." He took a slow step toward her. You're real." "I hope so," she said softly. He laughed, a short, disbelieving sound that cracked at the edges. "You're nothing like I pictured." Her heart clenched. "Is that a bad thing?" He shook his head. "No, it's just, I thought you'd look like warmth, but you look like strength." She let out a shaky breath. "And what does that mean? That maybe I didn't deserve to see you until now?" She didn't trust herself to speak. He reached up almost hesitantly, brushing his fingers against her cheek. "You have a scar here," he murmured. "From the first week. The vase. You remembered." "I remember everything," he said quietly. "Even the way you looked at me when I was broken." Her eyes stung. "You weren't broken, Daniel. You were just afraid," he finished for her. "I still am." She blinked. "Of what?" "Of seeing too much," he said softly. "Of wanting something I can't keep." The air between them felt fragile. "You can keep whatever you want," she whispered. He smiled, sadly. "That's the problem. I don't think I can stop wanting you." Her heart trembled. "You shouldn't say that." "Why not?" "Because now you can see me," she said, her voice breaking. "And you might not like what you see." He frowned. "Savannah, I'm not who you think I am," she said quickly, her chest rising and falling too fast. "I came here because I needed the job, because I was desperate, not because I was some angel meant to save you." His expression softened. "You think that's why I love you?" The word hung there. Love, soft, unguarded, dangerous. She froze. "You don't mean that." "I do," he said simply. "I meant it before I could see you, and now even more." Tears blurred her vision. "Don't say that. Don't make promises you'll regret." He stepped closer. "Do I look like a man who regrets light after living in the dark?" She wanted to resist, to remind him of the life he had to rebuild the world waiting for him beyond these walls. But when he reached for her hand, the fight in her heart unraveled. "I can see you now," he whispered, his thumb brushing her skin. "And you're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Daniel." He leaned forward, his voice trembling against her hair. "Let me be the one to hold you now. No more hiding, no more fear." And when his lips found hers, soft, uncertain, yet full of everything they hadn't said, it felt like the world paused. The snow outside the fire, inside the air itself, everything stilled around them. When they finally pulled apart, her heart was breaking and blooming at once. He smiled faintly. "Now tell me the truth. Do I look the way you imagined?" She laughed through her tears. "Worse." He grinned. "Good. Then we're even. But behind her laughter, Savannah felt a quiet ache, the one truth she hadn't told him yet, the one that would shatter everything when it came. Because sometimes, light doesn't just reveal what's beautiful. It also exposes what we've tried so hard to hide. And as Daniel held her close, tracing the shape of her face, as if memorizing it all over again, Savannah knew that the hardest part of love wasn't the blindness. It was learning how to stay seen. The days after Daniel's surgery felt almost unreal, as if the house itself was relearning how to breathe. Sunlight spilled into rooms that had been gray for years. Curtains once drawn were now open. Every morning Daniel stood by the window, tracing the horizon with his gaze, as though memorizing every color he had once forgotten. And yet beneath all that light, Savannah sensed something shifting, quietly, painfully, like a note held too long in a song. He was seeing the world again, but in the process, she felt herself slowly fading from it. "Come with me today," Daniel said one morning as he buttoned his shirt. "They're hosting a small dinner downtown. My mother insists I attend. I'd rather not go alone." Savannah hesitated. "Your world is different from mine, Daniel." He turned to her, smiling. "My world is whatever you're in." She wanted to believe that. She wanted to let herself be pulled back into that warm gravity that had kept them orbiting each other for months. But deep down, she knew better. "Your mother won't like it," she murmured. He stepped closer, eyes soft. "I don't live by what she likes anymore." The words made her chest ache, because she knew that wasn't entirely true, and because part of her didn't want to ruin the fragile peace he'd finally found. "I'll think about it," she said quietly. He smiled, that same unguarded smile that always unraveled her. "You always do." Later that evening, Savannah found herself standing in front of the grand mirror at the foot of the staircase, wearing the only black dress she owned. It was simple, a little worn, but the way it hugged her waist and flowed down her legs gave her a quiet elegance. Daniel appeared behind her, straightening his tie. When their eyes met in the mirror, his reflection stilled. "You look—" He stopped, searching for words. She smiled faintly. "Human, dangerous," he whispered. "Then maybe you should stay home," she teased. He grinned. "Too late. I'm already ruined." For a moment they simply looked at each other, the man who had learned to see again, and the woman who had taught him how to feel. But the night, like all beautiful things, would not stay untouched. The dinner was held at an art gallery in downtown Boston. The air smelled of perfume and champagne. Soft laughter rippled through the crowd. Savannah stayed close to Daniel's side, though she could feel eyes turning toward them, some curious, some unkind. When his mother, Eleanor Scott, approached, Savannah felt her pulse quicken. Daniel, Eleanor said, her tone polished, but cool. "You're glowing. The surgery's made you yourself again." Daniel smiled faintly. "Maybe it's the company." Eleanor's eyes flicked to Savannah, assessing. "Miss James, isn't it?" "The caretaker?" Savannah nodded politely. "Yes, ma'am." Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. "You've done a remarkable job. My son seems quite attached to you." Savannah felt her throat tighten. "I'm just glad he's healing." Eleanor's gaze lingered on her a moment longer, sharp as glass. "Healing is good, but sometimes the people who help us up are not meant to stay when we stand again." Daniel's expression hardened. "Mother." But Savannah touched his arm lightly, stopping him. "She's right," she said softly. He turned to her, eyes narrowing. "Don't do that. Do what? Agree with her when you don't mean it." She forced a small smile. "I mean it enough." Before he could respond, Someone called his name from across the room, a group of investors laughing, eager to shake his hand. "Go," she said quietly. "They're waiting. I don't care about them." "Yes, you do," she whispered, "because you have a life to rebuild, and you should." He stared at her torn, before finally walking away. Savannah exhaled and slipped toward the quieter part of the gallery, her heels clicking softly against marble. She stopped in front of a painting, a woman standing in a field, head tilted to the sky, eyes closed, as light spilled over her. The title beneath it read, "The First Morning After the Storm." "Beautiful, isn't it?" a voice said beside her. Savannah turned. A woman in her mid-30s stood there, elegant, confident, a champagne glass in hand. She smiled. "I'm Elena." The name struck Savannah like ice water. Daniel's Elena, the fiancée who'd left when the world went dark. "Oh," Savannah said quietly. "I've heard of you." Elena laughed softly. "I imagine you have. I've heard of you too." Savannah's pulse stilled. "From who? Daniel, of course. He talks about you the way people talk about miracles." Savannah didn't know what to say. Elena's expression softened. "I don't blame you, you know. He's hard to walk away from, even when you should." Savannah swallowed. "Why did you?" Elena took a slow sip of champagne. "Because I loved him the way people love stars, beautiful but far away. And when he fell, I didn't know how to follow." Savannah looked back at the painting. "Maybe you didn't have to," maybe Elena said, "but he was meant to rise again. And you?" She studied Savannah with quiet curiosity. "You were part of that rise. The light before he opened his eyes." "I'm not sure what that means." "It means," Elena said gently, "that sometimes the people who guide us out of darkness aren't meant to walk with us in daylight." Before Savannah could reply, Daniel's voice cut through the air. "Elena." He was standing behind them, tension in every line of his body. "You're back in Boston." Elena smiled faintly. "Only visiting. I wanted to see the exhibition." Her eyes flicked between them. "You look well, Daniel." "I am," he said curtly. "Thanks to her." Savannah's chest tightened at the protectiveness in his tone, but Elena only nodded. "I'm glad, truly." And then, turning to Savannah, she said softly, "Take care of him." Before either of them could respond, she walked away. Daniel exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't know she'd be here." "It's fine," Savannah said quietly. "You don't owe me an explanation." He looked at her eyes fierce. "I don't owe you one, but I want to give it." "Daniel, I don't want her. I haven't, not since—" "Stop." She shook her head, voice trembling. "It's not about her." "Then what is it about?" Savannah looked at him, and for a moment, her heart almost betrayed her. She wanted to tell him everything. The fear, the secret she'd been carrying, the truth about the life she'd left behind. But she couldn't. Not yet. So instead, she whispered, "It's about knowing when to step out of the light before it blinds us both." He frowned. "You're not making sense. Maybe one day you'll understand." And before he could stop her, she turned and walked away out of the gallery into the cold night. The wind bit against her skin as she crossed the quiet street. Snow fell again, slow and soundless, gathering on her coat. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay there anymore, not with the weight of everything unsaid pressing against her chest. When she finally reached the mansion later that night, she packed her things in silence. One suitcase, a few clothes, a letter. She sat at the desk, pen trembling in her hand, and wrote, "Daniel, when you read this, I'll already be gone. Please don't look for me. You found your way back to the world, and I was only meant to walk with you until you could see again." You once told me you wanted to see my face when you opened your eyes. I think you already did, just not in the way you expected. You saw who I was, beneath it all. Someone ordinary, someone afraid. There's something I didn't tell you, something I couldn't. Maybe one day I'll be brave enough. But for now, know this. Every word, every moment, every breath beside you was real. Be happy, Daniel. You deserve to live in the light. Savannah. When she finished, she folded the letter and left it on his pillow. Then she turned off the lamp, stood for a long moment at the doorway, and whispered into the darkness. Thank you for letting me be seen. The next morning when Daniel woke, the house was too quiet. He searched every room, calling her name, his voice echoing through the halls. But the only answer was the whisper of snow falling outside, soft, steady, endless. And on his pillow, her letter waited. He read it once, then again, his vision blurring, until he could no longer tell if it was from tears or light. When he finally looked up, the room felt smaller, emptier, colder. He pressed the letter to his chest and whispered into the silence, Savannah James, you taught me how to see. But no one warned me what it would feel like to lose the only thing worth looking at. A month had passed since Savannah's departure, yet Daniel still woke every morning, expecting to hear the soft clink of a teacup on his bedside table, or the sound of her quiet humming as she walked down the hall. But there was only silence now, thick aching silence that echoed through the mansion like a memory that refused to fade. He had tried everything to distract himself. Meetings, charity galas, renovations, even travel. But the world he had once longed to see again felt colorless without her in it. He would walk through the gardens at dusk and find himself listening for her laughter, for the way she used to talk to the flowers, as if they could answer back. He hated himself for it, for being a man who had everything, yet couldn't find peace without one woman who had asked for nothing. And every night when the city lights blurred outside his window, he read her letter again. He had memorized every line, every curve of her handwriting, every pause that hinted at what she hadn't said. But there was one sentence he couldn't let go of. There's something I didn't tell you. Something I couldn't. It haunted him. He could live with losing her, but not with not knowing why. One morning, Daniel drove back to the small town where she had said she grew up, Lakeshore, Massachusetts. He didn't tell his mother nor anyone from the staff. He just got in the car, a simple coat on his back, and followed the road north until the skyscrapers dissolved into pine forests and frozen fields. Lakeshore was quiet, a postcard town tucked between hills and a river. Snow still clung to the rooftops and the church bell rang faintly, somewhere in the distance. He parked near the local cafe, stepped out, and for a moment he just stood there breathing in the cold air. He felt like a man chasing a ghost. Inside the cafe, warmth and the smell of coffee wrapped around him. The woman behind the counter, gray hair, soft smile, looked up as the bell above the door chimed. "Can I help you, sir? I'm looking for someone," Daniel said. "Her name's Savannah James." The woman's eyes flickered in recognition. Savannah. His heart skipped. "You know her, I do. Sweet girl. Worked here for a few years before she left. She's not here anymore." The woman shook her head. "Moved out a while ago. Rents a small place by the river. But she doesn't talk much these days." Daniel hesitated. "Is she all right?" The woman smiled sadly. "Some people carry their storms quiet, son, but she's strong. Always was." He thanked her, got the address, and left. His pulse drummed faster with every turn he took, along the narrow roads until he reached a little wooden house by the frozen riverbank. The sight of it made something inside him twist. It was humble, weathered, but tidy flowers, in cracked pots, a child's tricycle near the porch. A tricycle. His breath caught. He climbed the steps slowly and knocked. Once. Twice. For a moment there was no answer. Then the door opened, and Savannah stood there. Her hair was loose, darker than he remembered, her eyes wide with disbelief. For a second, neither of them moved. "Daniel," she whispered. He exhaled, his throat tight. "You look different." "So do you." He tried to smile. "I had to see you." She stepped outside, pulling her cardigan tighter around her. "You shouldn't be here." "I read your letter 100 times, he said softly. "And still I don't understand." "There's nothing to understand." "There is." He took a step closer. "You said there was something you didn't tell me. What was it?" Her eyes flickered, and she shook her head. "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." She turned away, staring out at the frozen river. "Daniel, we live in different worlds. You went back to your life, and I stayed in mine. That's how it was supposed to be. Stop pretending you believe that." She flinched at the quiet force in his tone. He took another step closer. "You think I came all this way for closure? I came because I can't breathe without knowing the truth." Her hands trembled slightly. "You have to go. Not until you tell me." Silence fell between them, broken only by the wind brushing through the trees. And then, from inside the house, a soft voice called out, "Mama." Daniel froze. The word was small, sleepy, impossibly tender. A little boy appeared at the doorway, rubbing his eyes. He couldn't have been more than 3. Curls of dark brown hair, skin the color of warmth, and eyes, clear blue eyes that mirrored Daniel's own. For a heartbeat, time stopped. Savannah turned, her face pale. "Go back inside, sweetheart." But the boy blinked at Daniel, curious. "Mama, who's that man?" Daniel's chest constricted. He didn't need an answer. He already knew. Savannah knelt beside her son, brushing his hair back gently. "That's an old friend, baby. Go play in your room for a bit, okay?" The boy nodded and ran back inside, the sound of small footsteps fading down the hall. When she stood again, Daniel was still staring at her, his voice low, raw. "He's mine." Savannah's eyes shimmered. "Daniel, tell me the truth," he whispered. Her shoulders sagged, and finally she nodded. "Yes." The air left his lungs. "Why didn't you tell me I couldn't?" She said, her voice trembling. "You were recovering. You had a future again. I didn't want to be the reason you stayed in the past." He stepped forward, his expression a storm of disbelief and heartbreak. "You kept my son from me." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I didn't keep him from you. I was trying to protect him from everything, from the world you come from the kind of life that chews people up and spits them out. I didn't want him to grow up in your shadows. My shadows." His voice broke. "Savannah, I would have given him the world. That's exactly what I was afraid of." She whispered. "He doesn't need the world, Daniel. He just needs love." He stared at her, the anger in his eyes softening into pain. "You really thought I wouldn't have given him that?" Her lips quivered. "I didn't know what you were capable of anymore. You were still healing, still lost. I didn't want to give you something else to lose." He turned away, running a hand through his hair, his voice rough. "God, Savannah, you should have told me." She closed her eyes, tears falling freely now. "I know." The silence that followed was unbearable. Then a sound, a child's laughter from inside. Daniel turned, watching through the open doorway, as his son's small hand reached for a wooden toy on the floor. Something broke in him. Without a word, he stepped forward, kneeling beside the boy. The child looked up, curious, not afraid. "Hi," Daniel said softly. "I'm Daniel." The boy smiled. "I'm Eli." "Eli." He repeated the name like a prayer. "That's a strong name. My mama picked it. I bet she did." His voice shook as he brushed his thumb gently over the boy's small hand. For a moment, Savannah watched from the doorway, her heart a wild mix of fear and tenderness. Seeing them together so natural, so connected, it hurt and healed her all at once. When Eli ran off to grab another toy, Daniel stood and turned to her again. "He deserves to know who I am." "I know," she whispered. "Then let me be in his life. It's not that simple. It is to me." He stepped closer. "You think I can go back to Boston now? Pretend I didn't just meet my son?" Her breath hitched. "I don't know what to do." He cupped her face gently, his touch trembling. "Then let me decide with you this time. Stop running, Savannah." She closed her eyes, leaning into his hand for a brief, fragile second before pulling away. "I need time." "Take it," he said softly. "But don't shut me out again." He looked back once more at the small living room, at the quiet life she had built without him, and then left his footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. That night, after putting Eli to bed, Savannah sat by the window, watching the moonlight touch the river. Her heart was a battlefield of guilt and longing. For 3 years, she had carried her secret alone. She had told herself it was the right thing, that distance was protection. But now, seeing Daniel with their son, seeing the way his face softened, the way he had whispered Eli like a blessing, she wasn't sure of anything anymore. The truth had been spoken, but it hadn't set her free. It had only made the silence between heartbeats louder. And somewhere down the empty road, Daniel drove through the night with tears in his eyes, and one thought echoing in his mind. He had learned to see again, yes. But this was the first time he truly saw. Winter began to thaw in quiet places. First, the edges of the river, the brittle branches of the willow outside Savannah's window. The snow melted into soft gray puddles, and the cold wind carried the faintest hint of spring. Yet inside Savannah's small house, everything still felt frozen. Eli's laughter filled the mornings, but at night, when the house went still, Savannah would find herself standing by the window, fingers pressed to the glass, thinking of Daniel, of the look in his eyes when he saw their son for the first time, a look that had been equal parts wonder and pain. She hadn't heard from him in 3 weeks, not a call, not a letter, nothing. And yet she knew he wouldn't disappear completely. Daniel Scott was not the kind of man who walked away from the truth once he had found it. Still, the silence was unbearable. She tried to tell herself it was for the best, that Eli needed stability, that love was not always what saved people, but sometimes what broke them apart. But at night, she dreamed of him anyway, of his voice low and careful, of his hands warm and trembling when they'd touched her face that last time. In Boston, Daniel stood at his office window, the skyline glittering beneath him. He'd built this world from steel and ambition, but now it felt hollow, a perfect cage made of success. He had hired a private attorney to begin the paperwork quietly. He wasn't planning to take Eli away from her. He couldn't. He only wanted what had already belonged to him, the right to be a father, the right to love them both openly. But when the documents were ready, Daniel didn't sign them. He sat there for hours, the pen untouched, because this wasn't a boardroom deal. This was his heart, and he couldn't negotiate love. So instead, He drove back to Lakeshore. No driver, no entourage. Just himself, the cold wind, and the long stretch of road that led him back to the life he should never have left behind. It was evening when Savannah opened the door and found him standing there. He looked different. The sharpness in his suit replaced by something quieter. His coat was dusted with frost, his eyes tired but clear. "Daniel, I didn't know if you'd let me in," he said softly. She hesitated, then stepped aside. "Eli's asleep." He nodded. "I'm not here to wake him." When the door closed behind him, silence filled the small room. It was the kind of silence that lived between two people who had said too much and not enough at the same time. He glanced around the scattered toys, the drawings on the fridge, the soft light glowing from the hallway. "He's happy here." "Yes," she said quietly. "He doesn't know any other kind of life." Daniel's gaze found hers. "He should know me." "He will," she promised. "But not as a stranger showing up at his door with lawyers and papers." His jaw tightened. "That's not why I came." "Then why are you here?" she whispered. He took a step closer. "Because I've spent weeks trying to find a way to stop loving you, and I failed." Her breath caught. "Daniel." He shook his head. "No. Let me say it." His voice trembled. "You were right. I had to learn to see again, not with my eyes, but with something deeper. And when I did, all I saw was you. Every morning I woke up thinking I'd move on, and every night I went to bed, missing the sound of your voice. I don't want a world I can see if you're not in it." Tears slipped down her cheeks, quiet and unstoppable. He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "You think I came here to take something from you, but Savannah, I came to give something back." What she asked, her voice breaking. "My heart," he whispered. "The one you rebuilt when I didn't know I still had one." She closed her eyes, shaking her head. "Daniel, love isn't enough. There's Eli. There's your world, your family. I don't want their world," he said fiercely. "I want ours." He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing the inside of her wrist, the same spot where he'd once traced the rhythm of her pulse in the dark. "Let me be here," he whispered. "Not as a guest, not as a billionaire trying to fix things with money, just as a man who loves you, as a father who wants to read his son a story at night." Her lips trembled. "You make it sound simple." "It is simple," he said. "It's everything else that complicates it." For a moment, the world outside was quiet, only the hum of wind against the windows, the faint sound of Eli's breathing from the next room. Savannah looked at him, really looked at him, at the man who had lost everything and found his way back through the sound of her name. Then, without a word, she stepped closer and rested her forehead against his chest. He exhaled shakily, his arms coming around her, holding her like something fragile and infinite at once. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "Yes, you do," he murmured. "You've been doing it since the day you met me." Her tears soaked into his shirt. "I was so afraid." "So was I," he said softly. "But maybe fear is just love that hasn't learned how to breathe yet." She let out a small trembling laugh against his chest. "You always did know how to make things sound poetic." He smiled faintly. "Only when it's about you." In the days that followed, the house filled with a different kind of sound, the sound of Eli's laughter echoing through the hall, the rhythm of footsteps that no longer felt lonely. Daniel built small routines, breakfast with Eli before work, evening walks with Savannah by the river. Sometimes they spoke about the past, sometimes they didn't. There were no declarations, no promises written in stone, just the quiet truth of being together and choosing it every single day. One afternoon, Eli ran up to Daniel holding a paper airplane. "Papa, look. It flies better when you throw it toward the sun." Daniel froze the word, Papa hitting him like the gentlest kind of lightning. He knelt smiling through the sting in his chest. "Then let's make it fly higher." Savannah watched from the porch, her heart full and aching at once. Because love, she realized, wasn't about perfect timing or flawless choices. It was about finding the courage to keep reaching for the light, even after you've fallen through darkness. When the sun dipped behind the trees, painting the sky in strokes of gold and rose, Daniel stood beside her, their fingers brushing. He looked at her eyes reflecting the fading light. "You know what I've learned, Savannah, what? That blindness was never the real curse. It was fear. Fear of loving too much, of losing too deeply. But when you came into my life, you taught me something I'll never forget." She turned to him, her voice soft. "What's that?" "That some people aren't just meant to be seen," he said. "They're meant to be found." And when he kissed her, slow, reverent, with the kind of tenderness that spoke of everything they'd survived, the world seemed too still again. The wind quieted, the trees swayed, and for once there was no past chasing them, no future waiting to be solved. Only the now, the warmth between them. The child laughing in the fading light, the steady rhythm of two hearts finally keeping time together. That night, as Savannah tucked Eli into bed, he sleepily asked, "Mama, will Papa stay forever?" She brushed his hair back gently. "Yes, baby, he's home now." Outside, Daniel stood by the doorway, watching them, his eyes glistening with the kind of peace he had never known. When Savannah joined him, he whispered, "You think light ever gets tired of finding the same place to fall?" She smiled softly. "Maybe it just calls it home." He took her hand, their fingers lacing together, like two halves of a promise finally fulfilled. And as the night wrapped around them, quiet, calm, infinite, Daniel realized something simple, something true. The light he had spent his whole life chasing had never been in the skyline or the stars. It had always been here, in the warmth of her hand, in the laughter of their child, in the sound of her voice, calling his name. Love hadn't just helped him see again. It had taught him where to look. If this story touched your heart, take a deep breath, close your eyes, and think of the person who taught you how to see the world differently. Maybe it's time to tell them what they mean to you.